Welcome to Unified English Braille for Vision Professionals. This is a 12-part series. This is the first video. In session 1, we'll be talking about alphabetic contractions and something called strong characters. This video series was created by Julie Sumwalt, that's me, the voice you're hearing, and it's made available by the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction through the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. That duty done, I'll tell you about some guidelines that are now available pertaining to UEB, Unified English Braille. On the website for the International Council on English Braille, you can find the Rules of Unified English Braille, the second edition, which was published in 2013. Along with that are the UEB guidelines for technical materials, that's math and science. You'll want to be sure to download those two documents, especially for this course. If you're interested, there are also a couple of other documents from the BANA website, the Braille Authority of North America website. And those documents are guidance for transcription using the Nemeth code within UEB context if you are using Nemeth as opposed to UEB math. And if you do any foreign language transcribing or teaching, there is the provisional guidance for transcribing foreign language material in UEB. You won't be needing either of those two documents for this course, but you might be interested in your own work or your daily lives. All the references in this course are from the Rules of Unified English Braille, 2nd edition, 2013, which is published by, as I said, the International Council on English Braille, ICEB. Unless stated otherwise. As we get into more technical things, I will be pulling things from the technical rules. Some other sources that you might be interested in, also from the BANA website, the ABCs of UEB by Constance Risjord. That is a handy little document. It explains in a nutshell what's the most important things that are different between the old code, English Braille of American Edition, EBAE for short, and the new code, UEB. Also, there is a list of UEB Braille symbols and indicators on that BANA website. It's only available in PDF. If you need it in Braille, I felt it should be done in Braille, so I have it. I can send it to you, but it's not available on the BANA website. There are other courses besides this one that you might be interested in. Again, this is for vision professionals and those who already have a strong background in EBAE, the old code. If you want reinforcement of that or try a different approach, you're welcome to it. Here are some things, some courses to get you started. There is the instruction manual for Braille transcribing, the UEB edition. That is from the National Federation of the Blind, and it's meant for those who would like to become transcribers. You get certified at the end, and it's quite an intensive course. There's also a course titled Transitioning to Unified English Braille from Hadley. That is available to vision professionals as a paid course that you can get credit for, or you can take it just as a Braille reading adult. Then there's a handy little computer program. It's online, uebonline.org. It's from Australia, and it's kind of fun. You just go through the lessons, and you immediately find out if you did a word right or wrong. It won't let you go beyond a wrong word, so it stops you in your tracks, and you get immediate feedback about whether you've done it right or not. So that's a nice little thing. It's free. Just be aware that lesson 31 is about formatting, and it's from Australia, so they have completely different formatting than they do here in the United States and Canada, so don't do that lesson. And there's also UEB Bot, or I'm not quite sure how you say it, UEBot. That's from the Northern Illinois University. You might want to check that out. Okay, why are we switching to UEB in the first place? Why fix what isn't broken? Why all the fuss? Well, there were three main reasons for needing a new Braille code. One is because we're all more connected. So we needed a code that all the English-speaking countries could utilize. Before, each country kind of had their own codes, or some countries mishmashed the different codes together to try and come up with their own version. It was really quite a mess out there. So we weren't able to share materials or talk to each other really about Braille because we were all using different codes. So part of the reason for UEB is a globalization factor. This reduces costs as well and opens up the whole Braille world to those countries that might not have as much as some others. Another big reason was the technological advances that we've had, going back and forth between computers and hard copy or handwritten things. Computers were getting confused about when a certain symbol meant this or that, and so it really was difficult for Braille readers to download something from the internet, say, and have it come out in something that was readable. Also, because people with vision impairments are much more integrated in the general society, we don't ship them off to segregated centers anymore, thank goodness. But they're a part of everyday lives, and they have jobs, they have friends and family, they want to get online, and so we needed a code that had more of a one-to-one correspondence of print and Braille symbols, so that there wasn't any confusion when a computer tried to decipher something rather than a human being. The new code also provides for more flexibility. Before, whether anybody realized it or not, the general public, when we needed a new symbol because some weird thing came along in print and now we need a new symbol, we pretty much just grabbed whatever dots were left over, and then we had to come up with rules about how to read those dots because they usually conflicted with something else. So we needed rules to say when it meant this and when it meant that, and when we could use it and when we couldn't. It was getting very unwieldy. So we needed a code that allows for the rapid pace of change in print. The UEB code, as you'll see, has much more flexibility. We can easily create new symbols without messing with the rest of the code. UEB replaces the old code, EBAE, which again is short for English Braille American Edition. It also, for the most part, replaces Computer Braille Code, or CBC for short. For most of us, using just email addresses and website addresses and perhaps a directory path, we're not going to use the old Computer Braille Code anymore. We're going to use UEB. For studying Computer Braille Code, it's still a valid code, so we can go ahead and use that for that if we're actually studying programming, for instance. But for most of us, just putting in an email address somewhere, we're not going to use that special code anymore. UEB does not replace formats. UEB is a code. It has nothing to do with page layout or book layout. That is all contained in Braille Formats 2016. 2016 has just been published, and it conforms to the UEB code. It incorporates all those symbols and things that we're about to learn in this video series. Braille Formats 2011 had to do with the old code, so if you're still using EBAE, UEB of course doesn't affect that at all. But it doesn't have anything to do with formatting. So if you want to know about formatting, how to lay out a sentence or a paragraph or fill in the blank or what have you, you'll need to go to Braille Formats. You're not going to find it within this UEB code. So this video series is not going to be talking about that at all. Also, if your state or district or country, agency, whatever, is using Nemeth, then you'll use Nemeth for math and science. You will not use UEB. Music is already an international code, so we're not messing with that. And also the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA for short, is not touched by UEB. IPA has to do with linguistics. Most of us will never have to touch that code, thank goodness. Some basic UEB principles when they were developing this code are, again, no ambiguity with symbols. A symbol means what it means no matter what the context, nor does it represent something else. So one symbol, one Braille symbol for one print symbol. Also, the UEB developers wanted Braille to show exactly what the original print text showed, apart from just eye candy. So as much as possible, UEB represents print, and you'll see that it represents print much more closely than anything we've had before. A third principle was that, again, one print symbol has one Braille equivalent regardless of context. So no matter what, no matter where, that one Braille symbol will mean the same thing as it does in print. The UEB rulebook goes to the trouble of saying which EBAE symbols we're not using anymore. You might find that useful or confusing, but you're welcome to check it out. It's in section 1.3 in the rulebook. We'll be talking about all of those as we go along. Here on slide 11, I show the contractions that are eliminated in UEB. If you've heard anything about UEB at all, it's probably that some contractions have been dropped. And these are the contractions that we're not going to be using in UEB anymore. There are 9 of them, and only these 9 have been eliminated. So just because we've lost the contraction for into doesn't mean we've lost the contraction for in. So we can still use IN and then TO. Just because we've lost the contraction for ATION doesn't mean we've lost the contraction for TION. Also, the DD contraction is no more, but that doesn't mean that we've lost GG, FF, or CC. Why did we get rid of those 9? I mean, those are 9 contractions that we use all the time. Why not perceiving or rejoicing, some of those contractions that we don't see very often? Well, the determining factor for eliminating contractions wasn't the frequency of use or how popular they were. In fact, they didn't want to eliminate any contractions at all. But as they were developing the code, they realized that these contractions were causing problems. So here's why. I like to know why something is happening, because even if I don't like it, I might be able to swallow it better. So hopefully the same is true for you as well. The ATION and ALLY contractions were preceded by a .6. Well, as we all know, .6 is a capital indicator. It's still the capital indicator in UEB. So since it could mean either ATION or capital N, or ALLY or capital Y, especially in today's world where we have words smashed together, that was confusing. It required human thought to decipher. Computers couldn't make it out. They would go one way or the other, either capital N or the contraction, capital Y or the contraction, and usually whatever it chose was wrong. So we're not using that anymore. So now a .6, even in the middle of a word, is always going to mean a capital indicator. No confusion anymore. The 2 into by contractions had all sorts of rules about when you could use them and when you couldn't. So, and the UEB developers realized that they were inconsistent with other Braille symbols because they joined up with the next word. They were interfering with new symbol creation. Remember that one of the overriding principles was that UEB needed to be flexible in developing new symbols, and these 3 contractions were interfering with that. Also, these 3 contractions do not match print. We don't write 2 into by next to words when we're talking about handwriting. Since it doesn't represent print, and we want to represent print as closely as possible, we no longer have those contractions. And by eliminating those, I have to say a ton of rules were also eliminated. So that greatly simplifies things in UEB. The COM contraction, of course, had the same dots as a hyphen, so there were all kinds of rules about when you could use it and when you couldn't. The BLE contraction has the same dots as the numeric indicator, and again, in today's world, we have numbers in the middle of words all over the place, and it's difficult even for a human, a person, to know whether that is BLE or the numeric indicator. So we're not using it as the contraction for BLE anymore. We're spelling it out. The DD contraction, as we know, it can be the dollar sign in front of a numeric indicator. It could be DD in the middle of a word. It could be a period at the end of a word. Now it's just going to mean a dot or a period or a decimal point. And it's going to mean that no matter what, no matter where. So it doesn't matter if it's .com or 0.5 or a period at the end of the sentence. The old clock contraction is sadly no more. It was my favorite contraction. However, as we'll see later on, if there's a problem with when it was fully capitalized, that it created kind of a mess, and it just wasn't worth it to have special rules just for this one contraction. So we are not using it anymore. We're spelling it out. UEB has a lot of new terminology. It relabels things that we've done before. It formalizes things that were just kind of understood before. And it introduces brand new concepts. So in order for us to all be on the same page, I just have a few slides of some terminology. I'll be introducing more of it later on. First of all, a Braille character. A Braille character is any one of the 64 patterns of the 6 dots, including the space, which is so any of the possible dot configurations within one cell is a Braille character. The Braille sign or symbol might be more than one cell. It's whatever comprises a meaningful unit. So say a .5p means part. So those 2 cells would be a Braille sign or a Braille symbol. A group sign is a contraction which represents a group of letters. So examples of that might be OW, or ER, or OU, AR, IN, EN, the suffix, well, it's not always a suffix, but the contraction for LESS or MENT. And notice those last two have 2 cells. They're still a Braille sign because they are a unit. So those are group signs because they represent groups of letters. A word sign represents an entire word. So we have FOR, and now that those dots 2, 6 don't represent a group of letters anymore, they represent an entire word, the word enough. And the same for dots 1, 2, 5, and 6. As a word sign, they represent the word out, not the letters OU, in which case it would be a group sign. And then we have part and upon. Those are word signs. You might find section 2.2 in the rule book handy. It's a summary of all the contractions, and it puts them into their respective categories. Just 2 more terms. Well, there's another one on the next slide, but 2 more here. Symbols sequence. We're going to be using that term a lot. And the formal definition of that is an unbroken string of Braille signs, whether alphabetic or non-alphabetic, preceded and followed by a space. In summary, that means anything between 2 spaces. If there are only letters and not numbers or symbols involved, then it's called a letters sequence. And then there's something called strong. This is a category of Braille contractions that have dots in both the top and bottom rows and the left and right columns of the cell at the same time. And we're not including the alphabetic word signs in this category. Those are what we would call the but can do contractions. Those are not considered at all. They're not on the radar when we're talking about strong contractions. So here are some examples of strong contractions. One is with the dots 1, 6, it can be CH or child. And you'll notice it has a dot in the top of the cell, in the bottom of the cell, on the right hand part of the cell, and on the left. Even though it has only 2 dots, it still fills the requirements of being a strong contraction. So the term strong has nothing to do with how many dots are raised. It's whether they have dots in the top and bottom and left and right parts of the cell all at the same time, so all 4 corners. Another example is the ing contraction. We have a dot in the upper part of the cell, a dot in the left, or 2 dots in the lower part of the cell, a dot on the left part of the cell, and 2 dots on the right part of the cell. That's a strong contraction. The contraction for AR is dots 3, 5, 4, 5. Dots on the top, bottom, left, and right. It's a strong contraction. One of the fundamental principles of UEB, in fact I would call it probably even the fundamental concept of UEB, is something called standing alone. Standing alone, we've again had it somewhat in the old code, in EBAE, but we never formalized it. We didn't call it anything. We just said, well, when it's all by itself, then we do this. UEB formalizes this, and as I said, it's absolutely critical to understanding the rest of the code. If you understand this, the rest of it will make much more sense. Instead of being random rules that you try to memorize, you can just remember, is it standing alone or not? So let's get into this. Standing alone is a condition used to determine when a Braille sign is read as a contraction. A letter or letter sequence is considered to be standing alone if it is preceded and followed by a space, a hyphen, or a dash. We will be saying that phrase almost as a mantra. By the end of this course, you'll probably be seeing it in your sleep. So space, hyphen, or dash before and after will make something standing alone. There are certain symbols and indicators, or any combination of them, that if they appear before a letter or letter sequence, do not affect its standing alone status when there is a space, hyphen, or a dash in front of them. Those things are an apostrophe, an opening parenthesis, square bracket, or brace, an opening quotation mark, or any non-directional quotation mark. We'll be talking later on about what non-directional means. Then there's something called typeform indicators. We'll be talking about those later. A capital indicator in front of a letter is not going to affect its standing alone status as long as it has a space, hyphen, or a dash on either side of it. And an opening transcriber's note indicator will not affect standing alone status. Then there are certain symbols and indicators that, or any combination of them, that if they come after a letter or letter sequence, they will not affect its standing alone status when it's followed by a space, a hyphen, or a dash. And those things are some common punctuation, like a comma, semicolon, colon, period, ellipses, exclamation point, or a question mark. So if those things come after a letter sequence, a letter or a letter sequence, then it doesn't affect the standing alone status. Again, apostrophe is in this list, so a letter could be preceded and followed by apostrophes, such as I don't know, fish and chips or something like that. So you can have an apostrophe, N, an apostrophe, and that N is still considered standing alone because there's a space on either side of those apostrophes. If there is a closing parenthesis, square bracket, or brace after a letter or letter sequence, the standing alone status is not affected. Closing quotation mark, and again that non-directional quotation mark, will not affect standing alone status. The type form terminators, which we'll be talking about later. A capitals terminator, we'll be talking about that in a few sessions. Or the closing transcriber's note indicator, again, will not affect standing alone status. If the positioning of those symbols and indicators that we just talked about is other than what is stated in those sections, whether the ones that need to come before, the ones that need to come after, if they switch, if they are in the wrong place, then that letter or letter sequence is no longer standing alone. For instance, the ellipses. That was one thing that could follow a letter or letter sequence, and it would not affect the standing alone status. But here in this first example, it's coming before the word this. So that means that the contraction for this, it would not be standing alone, and it cannot be used. So we have to spell out the word this, T-H-I-S. However, the TH contraction as TH can still be used. The next example is this as the contraction, dots 1, 4, 5, 6. It's immediately followed by an ellipsis. Assume that there's a space coming after it. That means that the contraction for this is still standing alone. So we can go ahead and use it in full. The next example, there's a space between the ellipsis and the contraction, so it's obviously standing alone because it has a space before and a space after. If you were to have another word after that ellipsis, so you have the contraction for this, then the ellipsis unspaced, and then an unspaced word right after it, then that's a no-no. We can't use the contraction for this because even though it's followed by an ellipsis, it's not followed by space, hyphen, or dash after that ellipsis. There's a word there, the word one. So we need to spell out the word this, but we can still use the available contractions, so we can use that TH contraction as TH, but not as the word this. Okay, we'll move on to the first category of contractions, and that is the alphabetic word signs. This is the new term for those but-can-do contractions. We can use those alphabetic word signs whenever those letters are standing alone, and that includes the musical notes do and so, which was not the case in EBAE. In EBAE, it only meant words, the word do and the word so, not the musical notes. We use the alphabetic word sign when the word it represents is followed by an apostrophe with the following letters: D, L, L, R, E, S, T, and VE, provided the resulting word itself is still standing alone. So that makes sense. Those are common grammatical contractions, not Braille contractions. So if we add those letters with after an apostrophe, then that entire word is still standing alone. So an example would be use, as in Y-O-U apostrophe S. That whole thing is still considered standing alone. The apostrophe S does not make it invalid to use the contraction for U. Thatted is the same principle. We can use T and then an apostrophe and D, because D is one of those allowable contractions. By the way, all of these, this rule opens up the usable contractions by quite a bit from EBAE. UEB allows these contractions, so there are more instances when we can use the alphabetic word signs, because we can use these suffixes or contracted add-ons to those words. Okay, so the third example is so we can use S, an apostrophe, and then VE. I'm pretty sure that that is one that we would not have been able to use in EBAE before. We do not use the alphabetic word sign when the letters are pronounced separately in an acronym or an abbreviation. That's the same as what we had before. We wouldn't want to use just U representing the letters US when we're talking about the United States. We still need to have our capital indicators and then US. Or IT. We're not going to use X to mean the letters IT. If we actually say IT, then we need to spell out IT and use the capital indicators. We also do not use alphabetic word signs when one of them comprises a syllable, and when a word is broken down into syllables, and one of the syllables represents the word from the alphabetic word sign. So we have button, If we're showing syllables with a hyphen in between, we're not just going to use B there. We need to spell out B-U-T and then hyphen T-O-N. Strong word signs. Again, strong means raised dots on the top, the bottom, the left, and the right all at the same time. So when we're talking about word signs, we're talking about just 6 dot configurations. Child, shall, this, which, out, and still. We use the strong word sign when the word it represents is standing alone. So the sentence, these are very clear and simple examples of the word sign standing alone. I shall still find out which child did this. So we have shall and still, out, which, then child, and this. So notice this has a space on one side and an exclamation point on the other side, followed by presumably a space. An exclamation point is one of those things that does not affect standing alone status, so it's okay to use the full contraction for this in that sentence. Then the next sentence, which child-proof lock, question mark. So child, well, first of all, which has a capital indicator in front of it. That does not affect standing alone status. Presumably there's a space before that, and we can visually see that there's a space afterwards. So that meets the qualifications for standing alone. And then we have child. There's a space on one side and a hyphen on the other. So it's standing alone, and we can use the contraction. Childish, however, has a space on one side of that dot configuration of dots 1, 6, and on the other side is the letter I. So it's not standing alone anymore, so we have to spell it out. We can still use, however, the partial contractions that are available. The same goes for grandchild. That CH contraction is not standing alone. There's a contraction on one side of it and a letter on the other side, so we cannot use just the dots 1, 6 to represent the word child. We have to spell it out using the remaining group signs that are available. We can use the strong word signs just when the word it represents is followed by an apostrophe with the following letters. These are the same letters that we were just talking about with the alphabetic word signs. D, L, L, R, E, S, T, V, E. Provided that the resulting word is standing alone. So we can use the contraction for this in this'd. We can use WH to represent the word which in which'll. And then we have stills, apostrophe S, and whichiv. The next category that's strong are what UEB specifically calls strong contractions. The contractions that we talked about before, up till now, they are strong. They are contractions that happen to be strong, but UEB calls strong contractions these 5. It's a little bit confusing. But these 5 and 4 of the with are have special rules pertaining to them. The first of which is probably the second thing you've heard about UEB. If you've heard anything at all about UEB, you've probably heard about the dropped contractions, and that these 5 are not being joined together anymore. So and for of the with and the letter or the word are not put together anymore. So that, along with to, into, and by not being joined up together, means that nothing is joined up in UEB. It represents print more closely and eliminates a whole bunch of rules. Slide 30. Use the strong contraction wherever the letters it represents occur unless other rules limit its use. The UEB rulebook, unfortunately, is very fond of this phrase, other rules, unless other rules limit its use. That means you have to know all the other rules before you can know if you can use these contractions or not. Not to worry, I'm going to tell you about those rules in just a bit. But we use the strong contractions in words where we didn't before, such as pandemic, or profane, or professor, or profile. The next category are strong group signs. Now, group signs, remember, are contractions that represent groups of letters. There are quite a few of those. We have CH, GH, SH, TH, WH, ED, ER, OU, OW, ST, ING, and AR. We use the strong group sign wherever the letters it represents occur unless other rules limit its use. I told you it would come up frequently. So here are a whole bunch of examples in words that we did not use these contractions before. So one of the interesting things is because we're using these contractions more frequently, it pretty much makes up for the space taken up by dropping those 9 contractions that we aren't using anymore. So a lot of people think that, well, we're not using those 9 contractions, so we're going to UEB is going to take up much more space, but that isn't necessarily the case, at least not very much, because we're using these other contractions much more frequently than we did before. So let's just run through these examples. Aerial, anteroom uses ER, boredom uses ED, erase uses ER, freedom uses ED, uh-oh, that might make some people cringe. Goring, I think you pronounce that, you use the ER contraction. Lingerie, we can use ING. Meningitis, we use the ING. Mistake, we can finally use the ST contraction in mistake. It's not a mistake anymore to use the ST contraction in the word mistake. Edema, we're going to use the ED contraction even though it's a diphthong. And then we get to some that kind of makes us shake our heads, but this is the way it is. Predated, we use the ED. Redistribute uses ED. Reroute uses ER. Riflery uses the ER. That was a no-no in EBAE. And troubled, we can't use the BLE anymore because it doesn't exist, but that frees up the ED contraction. We'll see things like that happening quite a bit in UEB, where the elimination of one contraction now means that we can use a different contraction. So as promised, here are the rules that limit the use of strong group signs. If it's misread as a word, we're not going to use the contraction. The ING contraction cannot be used at the beginning of a word. We'll talk about bridging compound words in a bit. And aspirated H, meaning the H that you hear when you pronounce it. If it would seriously distort the recognition or pronunciation of a word, then we're not going to use it. Now, who decides whether it's been seriously distorted or not? I couldn't tell you, to be honest. I know we just went through that list, and it looks like that would seriously interfere with the pronunciation. However, if you look at these contractions more as letters, not as pronounceable syllables, you'll have a much easier time of accepting those contractions used that way. And another thing that would mean that we wouldn't use the strong group signs would be a diphthong. That's 2 vowels pronounced as one sound. If they are printed as a ligature, then we're not going to use the group sign. We'll be talking about ligatures in a much later session. When the use of a strong group sign for CH, SH, TH, WH, OU, or ST would be misread as a word, braille the letters individually. So I just listed the rules for you in that previous screen, but now we're going to go more in depth. And this first rule about being misread as a word is in the instance of, say, street, abbreviated as ST. As we can see, we have a space and a capital indicator, which does not affect standing alone status. A period does not affect standing alone status, and presumably there's a space after the period. So the ST is standing alone, which means it would be read as the group sign still. We don't want it to be read as still. We want it to be read as ST. So we are going to spell out ST when we mean street. The same goes for CH being used as the abbreviation for chapter 1. Again, we have a capital indicator on one side and a period on the other, and spaces on either side of those. So that means the CH is standing alone. It would be read as the word sign child. We don't want it to be read as that, so we're spelling out CH. Another one of those rules that was listed as limiting the use of group signs is that the ing contraction cannot be used at the beginning of a word. So use the group sign for ing anywhere else, wherever the letters it represents occur, except at the beginning of a word. And there's a note in the rules that says the beginning of a word is defined as the letter sequence which follows a space, hyphen, or dash, and which may be preceded by the punctuation and indicator symbols listed in section 2.62, which is the list of punctuation and indicators that we went through earlier in this video. So if this word, this letter sequence, is preceded by a space, hyphen, or a dash, and it has and it starts with ing, then you can't use it anymore. But we can still use the in contraction. So in ingot, we have in and then got. We cannot use ing. The name Inglesby, same thing. Ingredients, ingrown, especially since it's two words making a compound word, we can't use ing there. Toing and froing, we can't use ing because there's a hyphen in front of the ing there and a space on the other side, so it's standing alone and we can't use that ing contraction there. And then we have Smith, Ingy, or ing, however you say that last name. Again, the ing cannot be used because there's a dash in front of it. That .6 and then .36 is the UEB dash. We'll be talking about that later on. Do not use a group sign which would bridge the words which make up an unhyphenated compound word. An unhyphenated compound word is two little words joined together to make a big word. So we have cart horse. We would not use the TH contraction there. It bridges the two words and that's not allowed. We have grasshopper. We would not use the SH contraction. Insofar, we would not use the OF contraction because that bridges the words so and far. Kettle drum, we're not using ED. Longhand, we're not using GH. Northeast, we are not using THE. Notice that in UEB it's allowable to use the EA contraction in east when it's joined up to another word like that. We have painstaking, and we're not using the ST contraction. That's the same as it was in EBAE. Rawhide, we're not using the WH contraction. Storeroom, we're not using ER. Stronghold, we're not using GH. And sweetheart, we're not using TH or THE. Do not use the strong group signs for CH, GH, SH, TH, or WH, or the strong contraction for THE when the H is aspirated, when it's pronounced, when you can hear it. So we have knighthood. Not only is that an unhyphenated compound word, but we also pronounce that H. So knighthood, we definitely do not use the TH contraction in that case. Mishandle, we're not using SH because we pronounce the H. Mishap, same thing. Mishear, same thing. New Haven, we're not using WH because we're pronouncing the H. And Shanghai, we're not using GH because we are pronouncing that H, Shanghai. In general, we use the group sign that bridges a prefix or a suffix and the main word unless its use would hinder the recognition or pronunciation of the word. In particular, use the group signs for ED, EN, ER, OF, and ST. We've already seen that in action in some previous examples, but here are some more. Boredom, we might have already talked about that actually. We are using the ED contraction because that's a suffix. So it's not an unhyphenated compound word, it's a suffix. Redeemable, notice we're not using the BLE contraction, it doesn't exist anymore, but we are using the ED there because it's a prefix. Profusion, we'll be seeing that OF contraction much more frequently than we did before. And mistrust. that is a prefix MIS connected to the word trust, and so we can use the ST contraction in that case. Generally, you use a group sign that bridges a diphthong, again those two vowels pronounced as one sound, and an adjoining letter, unless the diphthong is printed as a ligature. A ligature would be the two letters joined together, and again we'll be talking about that in a later session. So we can go ahead and use the ER contraction in aerobic and in diaresis. We can use the ED contraction in encyclopedia, ER in fairy, EN in phoenix, and again EN in subpoena. Regarding word division, it's preferable that transcribers do not divide words at the end of a Braille line. But if you must, there are a whole bunch of rules that I'm not going to get into in this video series, but if you need to, there's a section in the rulebook that you will want to pay close attention to. Situations where you might have to do a word division might be in a class exercise that is teaching word division, or in line numbered text, which must preserve exact line breaks. Line numbered text is where you might have, say, a Shakespeare play, or studying poetry, or prose, which is paragraphs, where there are numbers along the margin telling you which line you're on. So in that case, the breaks in Braille have to be exactly where they are in print. So you would have to divide words if they are divided in print. And then you would have to go to the section 10.13 in the rulebook to find out how to handle contractions when there's when the word they're a part of is split up. In the back of the rulebook for UEB, there are 3 appendices, and the second one is all the examples that we just looked at, plus a whole bunch more. All these examples from section 10, which is what we just studied, are there in Appendix 2. Section 10 has to do with contractions. And you'll want to take a look at that appendix because some of them might surprise you, like infrared and chisel. You might think you know what to do, but I'm going to leave it up to you to look it up in the appendix and see how it's really done. And that's it, your very first video on the UEB code. I hope you learned something, and I hope you'll be brave enough to come back for session 2. Go ahead now and try the drill and or the homework if you're taking this as a class. And I will hopefully see you in the second section. Thank you.